Alright, hello everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Widicker Woods Chapter 2. If you are new to this book, this is the first book I ever wrote. I started this book about 6 years ago, and then I am currently still working on it. If you have not heard Chapter 1, please go back and listen to Chapter 1 so you can kind of get the context of what's going on here in Chapter 2. Chapter 1 was released back in October of 2021. Just to kind of fill you in here, the lead character, his name is Joe, just like me, and they are basically, the story takes place back in the 1800s during slavery, and this Joe guy just rescued these two black women from a plantation at the time. He kind of got them off the plantation, and they're going through some woods. It's called Widicker Woods that are apparently haunted. Like I said, this is a really old story that I wrote back when I was in my early 20s. But I hope you like it, and let me know in the comments below after I get through this chapter. And let's start here. Here we go. He asked her, "Wait, may I ask you what town we're in?" She paused for a moment and then told him, "Why, you're in the town of Widicker." She smiled and then slowly turned and walked off. Joe stood there for a moment with a puzzled look on his face, remembering what the girls had told him earlier. Moments later, Tabitha and Felicia came walking down the stairs. Joe puts his shirt back on. When they got down, Joe told them about Adiela. Then, Adiela and her sisters came down the stairs. Her sisters' names were Kelly and Tiana. Joe noticed that each of them had a southern accent, which Joe liked. Tabitha noticed that Joe was taking a liking to the three beautiful girls, and she became jealous. Then the girls told Joe that they were about to fix a big meal, and that Drake, aka Dr. Acula, would be down shortly to eat with them. So Joe, Tabitha, and Felicia sat down at a long table in the dining room. Then Tiana and Kelly brought out food and laid it on the table. But just before everyone started eating, they heard an eerie voice say, "Good evening." When they all turned around, they saw an old man with white hair, wearing all black. His eyes seemed to glow with a red tint, and his pale skin looked like rubber. He had long, bony fingers with long, dirty fingernails. He looked like he had already died years ago and had been embalmed twice. He introduced himself as Drake, aka Dr. Acula. Adiela and her sister stood up and said, "Good evening, Master." Joe and Felicia looked at each other with strange looks on their faces. Joe wondered why they called him Master if they were not truly his slaves. They were served ribs, potatoes, cornbread, green beans, and red wine. Joe asked if there was anything else to drink in the house other than wine, and Kelly answered, "Oh yes, but we'll be drinking it later tonight." "We only drink things that are red," Drake told them. "That's weird," Tabitha thought to herself. So Joe began to eat the ribs on his plate. They had a weird texture to them. Tabitha then tried hers and asked, "What kind of meat is this? I've never tasted meat like this before." "It's a house special," answered Drake. "We don't eat it very often. We hope you'll enjoy it." As he said that, thunder cracked loud and lightning lit up the room, and it sounded like a tree branch hit a window, breaking it upstairs. Drake then said, "I'll go check it out." He stood up and turned and looked at Joe and the girls and said, "Please, feel free to stay the night. We just love to have guests. We wouldn't want y'all going out into that storm again. It could get dangerous." Then he walked out of the dining room. After they were all done eating, Tiana took them upstairs, and she allowed Tab and Felicia to sleep in the room they originally had found with the bed. Then, Kelly took Joe further down the hall and across the house. She She told him there was another room that had a bed and a fireplace, so that he could stay warm. When they entered the room, the fireplace was already lit. She told him there was other clothes for a man in the closet, so Joe changed, laid down, and fell into a deep sleep. While he was dreaming, he dreamed he had woken up to see that the fireplace in his room had caught some furniture on fire. So Joe jumped to his feet in his dream and tried to put out the fire with the clothes he had taken off earlier. When that didn't work, he broke a window and looked out into the front yard. He saw Tabitha and Felicia wearing white dresses, sitting on an old wooden swing, hanging from a tree branch. "Help!" he yelled to them, but they could not hear him. When he turned around, he saw an old man whose throat had been slit. Blood was running out of his eyes and he was burning on fire. He began to walk towards Joe with his hands out, saying, "Leave while you can! Get out!" Joe screamed and ran for the door. He ran into the hallway and saw a ghostly figure sitting down playing a piano. It was another man who was crying as he played. Joe stared at him in disbelief, as he knew the man was a ghost. Suddenly the man stopped playing his piano and looked up at Joe. He began violently screaming, "What are you doing here? Get out! Leave now!" The man then stood to his feet and began to run after Joe. Joe ran as fast as he could, trying to find another room that was unlocked. Finally, a door opened, and he saw a window, so he shut the door and ran to the window to see if Tabitha and Felicia were still out front. He saw them still swinging in the front. Then he saw the headless horseman riding down the plantation's road. Joe began to scream at the girls, trying to warn them that he was coming. The horseman then pulled out his long sword and held it up, sprinting towards the sisters. Joe looked around the room and saw a wooden chair. He picked it up and began slamming it into the window, trying to get it to break, but it wouldn't bust. It was like the window was rubber, just absorbing the blows. He screamed and punched the window in frustration. Then he saw the horseman cut off Felicia's head, and then Tabitha's head. "No!" Joe screamed. The horseman then got off his horse and looked down at their bodies. Then he looked up at Joe and saw Joe in the window. The horseman ran towards the house as if he was coming to get Joe. Joe panicked. And when he turned around, the horseman was right in front of him, but before he had a chance to scream, the horseman rammed his long sword into his heart. As soon as this happened, Joe awoke, jumping from his sleep. He jumped to his feet and ran down the hall to check on Tabitha. He walked into her room and told her about his dream. He expressed his concern that something was really strange about this house. So the girls got up and followed Joe to check out the house a little better. While they were walking down one of the halls, they heard a distant voice screaming, "Help! Help us!" They heard the faint cry coming from a room they had never seen before. So Joe walked to the door and tried to open it, but the door was locked. Again, they heard multiple people screaming. So Joe started kicking the door until it finally opened. When it did, Joe and the girls rushed in. They saw 4 men and 2 women tied up with rope. "Vanessa?" the girl screamed out, running to the youngest girl. "You know her?" asked Joe. "Yes, we know her. That's our sister. We haven't seen her in 7 years. So they untied her and the others. All the girls hugged and told each other how much they missed her. They asked Vanessa what had happened and why they were tied up. Vanessa told them that Adiela and her 2 sisters were vampires, and that Drake was the one who turned them into vampires, and that the name Drake was short for Dracula. She said Drake had came to their plantation, promising to give them a better life. But when they arrived at the plantation, Drake revealed he was a vampire and killed the oldest member of the group by slitting his throat and draining his blood. Then he caught his body on fire. Then they attacked a man named Charles, who loved to play the piano for his master. The vampires attacked him, drinking his blood. Then they ripped his ribs out to save them to feed to the next victims. Oh my God, Joe interrupted her by saying, that was the men in my dream. They weren't trying to hurt me, they were trying to warn me. And those ribs we ate were Charles. We've got to get out of here, yelled Vanessa. They've been keeping us in holding, feeding off of us. Now that they've got y'all here, they'll kill off more of us. The names of the other women and 4 men were Samantha, Jake, Nick, Thomas, and Benjamin. As they began to discuss a plan to escape, they heard someone coming down the hall. They saw a shadow under the door. The shadow stopped momentarily and then began to walk off again. Joe said he would go out in the hall and look for a way to get everyone out. He told everyone to stay there because he also needed to get back to his room to grab his guns. So Joe slowly made his way down the hall, cautiously looking out for the unknown person whose shadow had been seen earlier. Joe made it to the door of his room and slowly began to open it. He saw that the room was pitch black because the fire had gone out completely. He heard a noise and suddenly the fire burst back into life in the fireplace, lighting up the room. Joe was startled and quickly turned his attention to the fire. Then he heard a familiar voice say, "Hey Joe, I've been waiting on you." It was Audiella. She was laying on Joe's bed in lingerie. Joe asked her what she was doing in his room. "I want you," she replied. "Don't you want my body, Joe?" Though she was very attractive, Joe knew he had to resist her. "No," he replied firmly. "Oh, that's too bad," Audiella responded. She then looked over his shoulder and nodded her head. Before Joe could turn to look and see what she was nodding at, Joe had 4 hands all over him, touching him and rubbing on him. He looked and saw it was Kelly and Tiana. They were also wearing lingerie. "Don't you want us, Joe?" asked Tiana. "Yeah, don't you? You can have all of us right now," Kelly added. They grabbed him and began to seductively pull him towards the bed. They then removed their clothing, revealing their near goddess-like bodies. They grabbed Joe's hands and began to make him touch their breast. Maybe they're not vampires, Joe thought to himself. Maybe the other girls were just jealous, and they made the whole thing up. And besides, these women are too beautiful to be vampires. It can't be true. Joe got in the bed with the girls after they had taken his shirt off. His level of temptation had become greater than his willpower to say no, and he gave in. He began to kiss Audiella and then Kelly, while Tiana was performing a sexual act on him. Joe began to feel his heart beating harder and faster. He felt his vein in his neck throbbing. The girls began to take turns performing on him, while the others kissed on him and put their breasts in his face. Joe had let his guard completely down due to the heat of the moment. Kelly and Tiana then began to kiss on Joe's neck. This alarmed Joe due to the fact that they could be vampires. But Audiella began to really perform very well, and this further distracted Joe, hindering him from saying anything to anyone. Joe began to feel their teeth on his neck, nibbling. Then the nibbling turned into softly biting, and then biting harder and harder. And they began to start scratching his chest and his stomach with their fingernails. Their fingernails became longer and sharper, and then they finally scratched Joe so hard that it drew blood. When the girls saw the blood, they all stopped what they were doing, and all dropped their heads and looked completely down to where Joe could not see their faces. Then all of a sudden they looked up and hissed. They had sharp white fangs and glowing eyes. They really were vampires. Ah! Joe screamed. As soon as he began to scream, the door to his room swung open. It was the others Joe had told to stay in the room. Two of the men pulled out guns and shot Adiela and her sisters. Joe thought he killed them, but the men explained they were only unconscious and would soon wake up. "Hey, those are my guns," Joe exclaimed. "How did you get them?" "You left them by the front door, so me and Jake grabbed them and came looking for you when you didn't return," explained Thomas. "Nick and Benjamin are coming with the girls." So Joe took one of his guns and they started down the hall, whispering the girls' names. As they began to turn the corner down the long hallway, they saw a man from behind, standing still at the end of the hall. As they got closer, they realized it was Benjamin. "Oh, good," Thomas exclaimed in relief. "Benjamin, where's the girls? And Nick?" asked Jake in a whisper. Benjamin did not turn around, nor answer him. "Benjamin, where's Tabitha?" Joe demanded in a stern voice. Benjamin's body began to tremble, and he began to whisper something as if he was chanting some rehearsed speech. Joe pulled out his revolver and put it against the back of his head. "Turn slowly," Joe commanded. Benjamin got silent. Then suddenly Benjamin turned around and grabbed Joe, knocking him to the ground, knocking the gun out of his hand. Benjamin jumped on Joe while on the ground and started trying to bite his neck. Benjamin had been attacked himself and became a vampire. Joe struggled to get Benjamin off of him as he hissed in his face. "Shoot him!" Joe screamed. "Shoot him!" Boom! Jake picked up a pistol and shot Benjamin in the head, blowing half of his head off. Joe pushed him off and got up. "If that don't kill him, I don't know what will," exclaimed Joe. "No, he'll come back after us again when he wakes up." "We've got to find the girls and get the hell out of here," Thomas replied. "Yeah, and get the hell out of Widicker Woods," Joe added. This concludes Chapter 2 of Widicker Woods. If you would like to hear Chapter 3, please let me know in the comments below and let me know what you thought of this story. I can keep going with this story if you guys would like. Just let me know that if you would want to hear Chapter 3, but also, like I said, let me know what you thought of this chapter in this particular book. I know this is a little unorthodox. This particular video didn't have pictures, it only had one. This is just kind of a test run. If it does good, then I will add pictures and sounds, kind of like we do with a different cowboy. Until then, if you like this book, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much. My name is Joe Jones, and you are watching The Cup of Joe Show. See y'all later.